Hi, Scott from Digital Fish with a family freshwater action video. We headed to Taupo to chase some freshwater KAHAWAI. Yes, we were trout fishing. This was my first time at the Waitahanui stream mouth. It looked promising, but I chose to wander up the spring-fed stream to see what I could find. Alright, all you Dora explorers, let's play a game called Spot the Trout. Can you spot the trout? There he is, but he's not a hungry trout. There's a trout in this picture somewhere. Can you see it? Well done, Dora explorers. Spotting the trout is the first part, casting well is the next challenge. Let's see if he likes flashback nymphs. Yes, he does like flashback nymphs. In fact, he liked my fly so much he took the whole thing after shaking his head. Okay, Dora explorers, last challenge. Can you spot the trout? There he is, but he's not a hungry trout today. We took the boat and launched at the top of Lake Ohakuri, not too far from Taupo on the hydro lakes of the Waikato River. It was a beautiful journey down the river and we took turns casting into fishy looking places along the way. I was using a marabou pattern that I had tied myself. The last time I cast a line in Taupo was about 10 years ago. I managed to hook a small rainbow while casting into an eddy along the side of the river. Rainbows are fun to catch, especially when they take to the air. While trout don't fight as hard as many saltwater species, trout fishing is awesome because of the amazing country. We saw natural geothermal activity on the hillsides and explored a few hot water streams that were cascading into the lake. This is HAURAKI GULF with a boat service and cafe available. The fishing was slow, but the scenery was like we were in a Jurassic Park movie. It really felt like we were in a lost world. The next day I made contact with Shane French from Dragonfly Guides, a local fishing guide and all-round good guy. Shane tied up some of his killer raptor nymph patterns for me, which proved to be effective on the Tongariro. He also was kind enough to share some intel on where the local trout were hiding. So the next day I was on the Tongariro, arguably one of the best trout rivers in New Zealand. I couldn't help casting a line into some fishy looking stretches, broken water that could have trout sitting behind boulders just resting and waiting for food to come to them. I was fishing a double nymph setup, a heavy nymph and a lighter nymph, and sure enough the indicator dipped and I was into my first fish. Trout aren't as fast as KAHAWAI until you hook one in the rapids and they scream off downstream. It's always fun stumbling over stones and oversized gumboots trying to keep a tight line between a fleeing fish and a tiny reel. This felt like an okay fish, but maybe not a big one. Pulling it closer I realised it was foul hooked, so I released him back into the current after a false start by the trout. This wasn't the place Shane told me to fish, but I couldn't resist dropping a couple of casts on my way. I came to the head of the judges pool and looked for another possible trout lie. I was just blind casting and working the water looking for a pocket that would be holding trout. I like fishing this kind of water because trout are less likely to see you, and with your trout fly tumbling quickly downstream, they don't always have a chance to closely inspect and reject your fly. I had a trout break my line and steal a nymph before this one stuck and I was into a fiery little rainbow darting all over the pool. Trout that are silvery have usually entered the river from the lake system. This was probably a maiden fish that was late spawning, and because I was under a bit of domestic pressure to come home with fish, I put this one in my bag. More casting and I hooked up again. It was my third trout from the same location on the double nymph raptor rig. This fish was a darker fish. It was a rainbow jack. You can tell a jack or male fish because of the hooked lower jaw. He was a bit skinnier than my last fish, so I released him back into the pool. Walking further up the river, I came to some willow trees and saw some good looking lies under the branches. Blind casting resulted in another hookup on a small rainbow. Sometimes the challenge isn't playing trout, it's finding and hooking them. Another nicely coloured rainbow jack, but too small to keep. I let him go. A drive to the upper pool saw me hiking through the forest to find some more fish. You don't usually get this kind of experience chasing snapper. I arrived at Boulder Reach and walked up towards the cliff pool. There was a good looking lie behind a boulder that I thought looked very fishy. Here I was alone on the Tongariro, just me and the trout and 3 loads of rafters. Oh well, so much for solitude. The next morning I was down at the Waitahanui again. I wasn't sure if I was lucky to have the place to myself or if the locals knew something I didn't. Casting across and down with a smelt fly, I had some hits in the shallow water, but nothing stuck, so I moved further down into the lake where the drop-off had formed. I eventually got a strike and hooked up on another rainbow. This one was scrappy, not really big enough to keep. I could see the occasional fish splashing in the current chasing smelt, and sometimes they would come across my fly. I hooked another fish, this time a bit bigger. It had taken a liking to my small grey ghost fly. These silver lakefish often have red flesh and taste pretty good. This one was heading for the smokehouse at Shane French's place. I hooked some more fish and had a few self-releases like this rainbow. I went back the next day with my wife, who waded out to the lip and spoke to 3 older locals who had seen one fish between them the last few hours. On our first cast we managed to hook a good fish, much to the surprise of the locals. Unfortunately, it won its freedom. But a half hour later my wife had hooked another one, which was pretty good considering she's still learning how to cast a fly rod. It was another smaller trout, like many I'd hooked over the past few days. The last morning I took my son back to the same spot. We hooked a good trout on the 3rd cast, but apparently it was my netting skills that let the team down and it escaped. He later got a smaller fish, so it's good to catch something before we came home. I'd forgotten how much fun trout fishing is. Next time I'll bring the drone. This is Scott from Digital Fish. Thanks for watching.